in the perfectly manicured enclave of Willow Creek Estates, where every lawn was meticulously trimmed and every mailbox gleamed freshly painted. The pool was the neighborhood's crown jewel, a sparkling blue oasis nestled behind the clubhouse. It was the place residents gathered during warm months to cool off, socialize, and create memories. But as idyllic as Willow Creek appeared, beneath the surface simmered tensions ready to boil over. The HOA, always vigilant about maintaining order and harmony, announced new pool regulations at the start of summer. These changes, meant to ensure safety and cleanliness, included stricter hours, mandatory supervision rules for children, limits on guest access, and even new attire guidelines. The board promised these rules were for the community's benefit, aiming to prevent accidents and maintain a family-friendly atmosphere. For many residents, the rules were accepted with reluctant nods and quiet grumbles. But for Karen Mitchell, a longtime homeowner known for her sharp tongue and unapologetic assertiveness, the new regulations were an affront. Karen viewed herself as a pillar of the community, a devoted mother and neighbor who had always played by the rules until now. She saw the new pool policies as overreach, an unnecessary restriction on her family's freedom and enjoyment. Karen's refusal to comply was immediate and conspicuous. She continued bringing large groups of friends and family to the pool, ignoring guest limits. Her children played outside of designated hours, and she openly challenged lifeguards enforcing the new rules. Notices from the HOA warning her to follow regulations went unheeded. Karen's attitude was one of defiance, a bold declaration that she would not be controlled. The HOA board, led by the meticulous and determined president, Susan Carter, responded swiftly. They issued escalating fines and warnings, attempting to enforce the rules through formal channels. But Karen's resistance only grew more brazen. Her defiance emboldened others who felt similarly constrained, and whispers of rebellion began circulating in the neighborhood. The pool, once a source of community bonding, became a battleground. Neighbors who supported the rules clashed with Karen's faction, turning casual swims into tense standoffs. Small incidents like Karen's children splashing loudly after hours, or guests refusing to sign in sparked angry confrontations. The atmosphere thickened with resentment and rivalry. As the summer progressed, the conflict escalated beyond mere rule-breaking. Acts of petty sabotage emerged, each side seeking to undermine the other. Karen's pool equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. Lifeguard chairs were found overturned. Complaints flooded the whole office from all corners. The board's efforts to restore order only intensified the hostility, turning a simple rules dispute into a neighborhood spectacle. Local gossip took on a life of its own, with social media posts and group chats dissecting every incident. Residents took sides openly, with some praising Karen for standing up to bureaucracy, while others condemned her for disrupting community peace. The once friendly pool area became a hot spot for drama, capturing the attention of not just Willow Creek but neighboring communities as well. Karen, undeterred by the mounting backlash, framed herself as a crusader for personal freedom and fairness. She held informal meetings, rallied supporters, and vowed to fight the HOA's regulations tooth and nail. Susan Carter and the board prepared for a prolonged battle, recognizing that this showdown was about more than pool rules. It was a clash of personalities, power, and pride. The summer that promised relaxation and fun turned into a season marked by confrontation and division. Willow Creek Estates had been thrust into the spotlight, and the world was watching as Karen and the HOA prepared for the ultimate showdown. The once serene streets of Willow Creek Estates now echoed with murmurs of conflict. What started as a disagreement over pool regulations had quickly morphed into a neighborhood-wide feud, fracturing the community into opposing camps and turning every casual encounter into a potential confrontation. Karen Mitchell was at the center of the storm, her refusal to comply with the HOA's new pool rules sparking a backlash far beyond anyone's expectations. Her stance wasn't just about rules, it was a challenge to authority itself, a refusal to bow to what she perceived as arbitrary restrictions imposed, without consideration of the residents' real needs. The HOA, led by President Susan Carter, responded with escalating force. Fines piled up on Karen's account, with each new violation adding hundreds of dollars to her balance. The letters became more frequent, more stern, and more public, delivered not only to Karen's mailbox but mentioned in community newsletters and at HOA meetings, signaling to neighbors that this was a serious breach of community standards. Yet Karen remained unyielding. She continued to bring large groups to the pool, sometimes twice the allowed number of guests, and she openly flouted the new restricted hours. Her children played noisily past curfew, much to the irritation of neighbors trying to enjoy the quiet evenings. Karen's public challenges to the lifeguards and HOA representatives became increasingly frequent and intense, creating an atmosphere of tension and hostility. The neighborhood quickly divided. On one side stood the rule followers, those who believed in the importance of order, fairness, and safety. They saw the HOA's rules as necessary to protect children, prevent accidents, and preserve the quality of life in Willow Creek. Many were longtime residents who had watched the neighborhood grow and prided themselves on its pristine appearance and harmony. Opposing them were Karen's supporters, a diverse group ranging from young families frustrated by the strict guest limits, to others who simply chafed at what they saw as an overbearing HOA. To these residents, Karen was a symbol of resistance, a person willing to stand up against what they perceived as bureaucratic overreach and intrusion into personal freedoms. Tensions between these groups escalated quickly. Social media groups, which had once been places to share recommendations for landscapers or lost pets, became battlegrounds filled with heated arguments, accusations, and character attacks. Private messages leaked, and screenshots were posted publicly, intensifying the hostility. Some residents even created separate online groups aligned with either the HOA or Karen's faction, deepening the divide. The pool area, the focal point of the conflict, lost its sense of community. Lifeguards, caught in the middle, felt the pressure mounting daily. Their instructions were challenged openly, sometimes met with hostility or passive aggression. Many expressed feeling unsafe or disrespected. Pool staff turnover increased as the atmosphere became toxic. Neighborhood gatherings, once a highlight of the summer, were canceled or boycotted by one faction or the other. Invitations to parties or casual meetups became political statements, and many residents found themselves isolated or excluded based on their perceived loyalties. As the conflict intensified, acts of sabotage began to surface. Mysterious damage to the pool's filtration system caused temporary closures, angering residents who relied on the facility for summer relief. Karen's pool access card was inexplicably deactivated, cutting off her entry. Graffiti appeared overnight on fences and signs, some targeting Karen personally, others attacking the HOA board. Some residents reported garden hoses mysteriously cut or sprinklers turned on at odd hours, though no one took responsibility. Fingers pointed in every direction. The HOA board retaliated with their own subtle measures. Notices were placed on doors warning about trespassing or unauthorized use of facilities. HOA meetings became forums for airing grievances and issuing ultimatums. Susan Carter tightened enforcement, hiring additional security personnel and increasing surveillance around the pool area and community spaces. Behind closed doors, the HOA faced internal conflict. Some board members worried that Susan's uncompromising approach was fueling more resentment than compliance. Others argued that weakness would encourage further defiance and chaos. The debate grew heated as the neighborhood's harmony slipped further away. Karen, meanwhile, was not just reacting, she was strategizing. She met with neighbors who had expressed frustration with the HOA's policies, building a coalition to challenge the board's authority at the upcoming annual meeting. Legal consultations were underway, with talk of possible lawsuits or demands for policy revisions. Karen framed her battle as one of rights and representation, rallying support through social media campaigns and informal neighborhood meetings. The stakes were escalating quickly. Fines levied against Karen threatened to place liens on her property, but she refused to pay, confident that her cause was just and that her supporters would rally to her defense. The HOA countered with formal legal notices and threats of further action, signaling that the conflict was moving into a new, more serious phase. As summer waned, the neighborhood braced itself for an inevitable showdown. Petitions circulated calling for change, some demanding Karen's eviction from the community, others seeking a complete overhaul of the HOA leadership. The pool, once a place of joy and relaxation, was now a symbol of division, a physical and ideological fence between opposing sides. Every encounter became a potential conflict, every social media post a skirmish and a growing war. The idyllic image of Willow Creek Estates was shattered, replaced by a community struggling to hold itself together amid growing distrust and animosity. The simple question of pool rules had opened a Pandora's box, exposing deeper issues of power, control, and belonging. The residents of Willow Creek faced a choice: continue down a path of division and discord, or find a way to rebuild trust and community before it was too late. By the time Chapter 3 arrived, Willow Creek Estates was a powder keg on the verge of exploding. What started as a simple dispute over pool regulations had spiraled into months of escalating tensions, with every day bringing new acts of defiance, retribution, and petty warfare. The neighborhood no longer resembled the idyllic, quiet community it once was. It had become a battlefield where neighborly trust was shattered and paranoia ran rampant. Karen Mitchell, refusing to bow to the HOA's mounting fines and strict enforcement, had become both a local hero and a hated figure. Her supporters admired her courage to stand up against what they saw as an oppressive HOA regime, while her detractors blamed her for tearing apart the fabric of community life. The pool, the heart of the neighborhood's social life, had turned into a symbolic war zone, embodying the very divisions that now cleave Willow Creek Estates. The HOA board, under Susan Carter's leadership, intensified their crackdown. Legal threats became a near-daily occurrence, and collection efforts on Karen's outstanding fines escalated to the point of threatening a lien on her home. The board hired additional security personnel to patrol the pool area, aiming to ensure compliance and protect staff who had become targets of verbal abuse and intimidation. But Karen was no longer just a rule breaker. She was an orchestrator of resistance. She mobilized her supporters with strategic precision, coordinating efforts to contest every fine, document every HOA misstep, and undermine enforcement efforts. Informal meetings in backyards and online chats became planning sessions for the next move. In this unfolding saga, Karen's camp grew savvy in legal tactics, social media messaging, and public relations, amplifying their narrative of fighting for personal freedoms and against overreach. As the conflict escalated, acts of sabotage proliferated, turning the neighborhood into a minefield of suspicion and retaliation. The pool's maintenance system suffered repeated mysterious malfunctions, filters clogged, pumps broken, and chemicals tampered with, forcing multiple temporary closures. Investigations failed to uncover a culprit, but fingers pointed at both sides. Each incident deepened mistrust and heightened tensions. Karen's property became a frequent target. Her pool access card was deactivated multiple times, requiring repeated intervention from the HOA office. Her mailbox was vandalized, spray painted with cryptic messages accusing her of tyranny and chaos. At night, strange noises and the sound of breaking glass sent chills through the neighborhood, though no clear evidence of who was responsible ever surfaced. Retaliation came from Karen's supporters as well. HOA board members found their yards strewn with anonymous notes accusing them of corruption, bullying, and hypocrisy. Garden ornaments were rearranged or stolen. Security cameras aimed at the pool were blinded with spray paint or covered with tape. Anonymous social media accounts posted photos and videos exposing HOA meetings, often editing footage to cast the board in a negative light. The conflict wasn't limited to physical acts. Psychological warfare took a heavy toll. Neighbors whispered suspicions about one another's loyalties. Invitations to social events vanished or were rescinded without explanation. Children who once played together were now wary of crossing invisible boundaries drawn by their parents' allegiances. The The lifeguards, caught between enforcing the increasingly complex and contested rules, faced escalating harassment. They were shouted at, challenged, and sometimes threatened, turning their jobs into stressful and thankless tasks. Many quit or requested reassignment, further straining the pool's operation and leaving it vulnerable. The HOA board meetings became spectacles of tension and drama. Sessions extended for hours, dominated by heated arguments, personal attacks, and vocal opposition from Karen's growing faction. Petitions to recall board members were presented. Legal counsel advised on potential escalations. While some members expressed private doubts about the efficacy of their approach, Karen, sensing the community's division, leveraged every opportunity to rally her supporters. She organized informal gatherings near the pool, posted passionate messages on neighborhood social media channels, and even invited local news to cover the story. The media attention added fuel to the fire, casting Willow Creek Estates as a neighborhood in turmoil and shining the spotlight on the pitfalls of HOA governance and neighborly disputes. Despite the chaos, the underlying issues remained unresolved. The pool rules, though the spark, were a symbol of larger questions about control, fairness, and community identity. Residents wrestled with questions about how much power an HOA should wield, how individual freedoms should be balanced against collective well-being, and what it truly meant to belong to a neighborhood. As summer waned and the conflict showed no signs of abating, the neighborhood braced for what many feared would be an even more explosive confrontation. The battles fought with fines, words, and sabotage had only scratched the surface. The ultimate showdown was looming, a moment that would either tear Willow Creek Estates apart or force it to confront the painful work of reconciliation. By the time the sweltering days of late summer arrived, Willow Creek Estates had become a neighborhood unrecognizable to those who once took pride in its neat lawns and quiet streets. The pool, meant to be a place of joy and community, had instead become the epicenter of one of the most dramatic HOA battles in recent memory. Karen Mitchell's defiance had ignited a firestorm, and with each passing week, the conflict grew more intense and personal. Karen's refusal to abide by the new pool regulations was no longer a private dispute. It had become public theater, a spectacle that split the community and played out not only behind backyard fences but in front of social media audiences and local news cameras. The war over pool rules had evolved into a contest of humiliation and retaliation that would push neighbors to extreme and often shocking lengths. The HOA board, frustrated by months of resistance, decided to take a different tack. Public shaming became their weapon of choice. At a monthly HOA meeting broadcast online for residents, Susan Carter unveiled a list of the top offenders who had repeatedly violated the pool rules, complete with photos and detailed accounts of infractions. Karen's name was featured prominently, alongside others who had sided with her. This public naming and shaming sent shockwaves through the community. The Karen list, as it was quickly dubbed, circulated rapidly on neighborhood social media pages. Some applauded the board's transparency and tough stance, others decried it as bullying and an abuse of power. But no matter the opinion, it was clear that the strategy had escalated the conflict to a new level. Karen herself was targeted in other ways. Anonymous flyers appeared on doorsteps, accusing her of endangering children by ignoring lifeguard instructions and encouraging chaos. Murmurs of boycotts against businesses owned by her friends surfaced. At the pool, Karen found herself the subject of whispered conversations, glaring stares, and thinly veiled insults. Yet Karen was no stranger to confrontation. Rather than retreating, she turned the public humiliation into fuel for her fight. Her supporters organized rallies at the pool entrance, holding signs proclaiming freedom to swim and no more tyranny. They used social media to share videos highlighting what they described as the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. The neighborhood was polarized, with public spaces becoming arenas of protest and counter-protest. Neighbors who previously had remained neutral found themselves drawn into the fray. Some expressed frustration over the noise, the drama, and the growing tension, that permeated every interaction. Others feared the damage being done to the community's reputation and property values. The once friendly neighborhood chats turned toxic, filled with accusations and conspiracy theories. The situation reached a breaking point when a highly anticipated community pool event, the annual Summer Splash, was canceled amid threats of disruption and safety concerns. This cancellation was a bitter pill for many residents, symbolizing just how far the conflict had damaged the neighborhood's spirit. Children who once looked forward to the event were left disappointed, and adults mourned the loss of what had been a beloved tradition as tempers flared. Some neighbors resorted to more direct forms of harassment. Karen's property was vandalized. Again, windows splattered with paint, her yard littered with broken pool toys and garden debris. On other occasions, residents reported their vehicles damaged or personal belongings tampered with. Though the culprits were never publicly identified, the pattern of retribution was unmistakable. The HOA board, increasingly criticized for fostering a hostile environment, struggled to maintain control. Internal divisions surfaced as some members questioned the ethical implications of their tactics. Calls for mediation and conflict resolution were raised, but trust between the opposing sides had eroded so deeply that genuine dialogue seemed impossible. Karen's legal team prepared to challenge the fines and enforcement actions, arguing that the HOA had overstepped its authority and violated her rights. The legal battle promised to drag on, draining resources and attention from the community. Meanwhile, the social fabric of Willow Creek Estates frayed further. Families who once shared neighborhood block parties now avoided each other. Social media groups, once a source of helpful information, devolved into hostile forums. The community had become a cautionary tale of how quickly neighborly relations could unravel under pressure. Amid the chaos, some residents quietly wished for peace, longing for a day when the pool would again be a place for laughter and leisure, not conflict and division. But the path back to harmony seemed steep and uncertain. The question lingered: could Willow Creek Estates recover from this prolonged showdown? Or had the public humiliations and broken trust pushed the community beyond repair? As the simmering conflict in Willow Creek Estates stretched into months, the neighborhood found itself mired not just in personal vendettas and social warfare, but in a tangled web of legal proceedings. The pool rules dispute that had once seemed manageable now escalated into a full-blown courtroom drama, consuming time, money, and the very spirit of the community. Karen Mitchell's refusal to adhere to the HOA's pool regulations and the resulting fines and penalties had reached a tipping point. The HOA board, led by Susan Carter, grew increasingly impatient with what they perceived as Karen's defiance and unwillingness to cooperate. The board initiated formal legal action, filing for liens against Karen's property to collect the unpaid fines. They also sought court injunctions demanding compliance with the pool rules and threatening penalties for continued violations. Karen, however, was not without resources. With the help of a legal team sympathetic to individual homeowner rights, she mounted a vigorous defense. Her attorneys argued that the HOA's new regulations were arbitrary, inconsistently enforced, and violated provisions in the community's governing documents. They contended that Karen's fines were excessive and retaliatory, designed to intimidate rather than enforce legitimate rules. The legal filings brought the private neighborhood conflict into public view. Court documents became a matter of record, and local news outlets already intrigued by the drama began following the story closely. Headlines framed it as a David versus Goliath battle between a determined homeowner and a powerful HOA bureaucracy. The media attention only intensified the pressure on both sides. Within Willow Creek Estates, residents watched anxiously as the drama unfolded. Some sided with Karen, seeing her as a defender of freedom against overbearing governance. Others supported the HOA board's efforts, viewing them as protectors of community standards and safety. The legal battle polarized the neighborhood even further, with parties rallying to support their chosen side through donations, petitions, and vocal advocacy. Meanwhile, the conflict's impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. The prolonged dispute drained financial resources from both Karen and the HOA. Legal fees mounted, diverting funds that could have been used for community improvements or social programs. The HOA faced criticism for what some called heavy-handedness and a failure to find common ground before resorting to legal action. With tensions at a boiling point, the HOA board proposed a last-ditch effort to resolve the dispute outside of court. They called for a community mediation session, inviting residents to discuss the conflict openly and seek a path toward reconciliation. The meeting was advertised as a chance for healing and collaboration, though skepticism ran high on both sides. The mediation session drew a packed crowd, with residents eager but wary. Emotions ran high as grievances were aired and past wrongs recounted. Karen and Susan Carter, representing the HOA, sat across from each other in a room thick with tension. The mediator and neutral third party attempted to steer the conversation toward compromise, emphasizing shared interests and the desire to restore community harmony.